Well, as we sit here today, less than a week away from the NFL draft now, we are experiencing what I would refer to as a historical anomaly. Not a single team has yet to make a move impacting their first round draft pick. All 32 teams still holding on to their native picks. That has never happened before in the history of the NFL draft. We've talked about why that is, and we'll talk more about that today. But there are indications now that at least one team might be looking to shake things up a little bit and move up into the first round. There are a couple of factors necessary if John Schneider indeed is looking for a trade partner to revert back to his old MO and move back in this draft to get even more value on day two. And that is, there's a team out there reportedly that might be A, desperate enough, and B, looking for a quarterback. And those two factors could combine to give the Seahawks an opportunity to make a big, bold move back that would impact their draft class this year and next. Well, today I'll get you caught up on those reports, tell you who that team is, who they might be targeting, and what it would cost them to move up. What kind of haul could the Seahawks get if they make a move out of the first round? That's coming up today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
As we get closer to the draft, I feel you. I hear you, I see you, and I feel you. I can tell that draft fatigue is setting in. We have analyzed, overanalyzed, hashed, and rehashed just about every scenario possible, right? And it seems as if some of you are maybe taking a little mental break this weekend before we get into the nitty-gritty of it and all of the opportunities for content next week, draft week, because you're just not watching the content the last couple of days. But today, I was going to take a breather today too, but then these reports came out and I think it's worth reacting to. Before we get to it though, of course, I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. And if you would, please, if you don't already, subscribe to the channel and like the video, hit that bell for notifications if you would. Those are the best ways to really support and help the channel grow. But if you want to be a more tangible contributor to supporting me in my full-time content creation venture and support the channel, all those links are offered down below for you as well. All right, so nobody's made a move yet in regards to the first round. And I expect that it'll stay that way until Thursday. And the reason for that, just to catch you up again, in case you're late to the process here, this is a unique draft class in many ways. And one is that it lacks blue chip players at the top. That the consensus seems to be that after the top 10 or so, the talent level really levels out. And that many teams may have as few as 10, 11, 12, I think is the biggest number that I've heard, first round grades, true first round grades. And if you're not sure what that means, if you're kind of new to being a draft nerd, most teams don't have 32 first round grades. It doesn't work that way. They don't try to identify the 32 players that they think are going to be first round picks. They put first round grades on players that they believe are good enough to be first round picks in any draft class. Okay. And so after the first 10, there's a drop off, or 8 or 9, whichever number that you choose. But after that, if your first thought then is, well, that's bad news, right? The good thing about this class, we've known this for a while, and the closer we get to it, the more we study it, it just kind of solidifies this theory that then instead of the talent level, usually in a draft class, if you imagine a line graph, it's just kind of a gradual, steady trend down, right? You have your top players at the top, and then with each pick, theoretically, you get a little bit of a less quality prospect, a little bit lesser talent. And I'm talking across position groups, right? If you hold a wide receiver up to an edge rusher, just generally, how good are they? What kind of career are we projecting for them? This year, it's the same, as opposed to, the 15th pick just isn't going to give you quite the quality as the 10th pick, and the 25th pick isn't going to give you quite the quality of the 15th pick. Most agree that from 10-ish to 80-ish, and in my opinion, really all the way through day two, is pretty even. And that lends itself to wanting to move back, right? Accumulate as many picks as you can. And the Seahawks, it wasn't their intention when they headed into this offseason to trade Geno Smith and DK Metcalf. But that happened, and it gave them 2 more picks on day 2. And so they sit with 5 in the first 92. I think they're 3rd overall in the quality and the value of their draft capital in this draft. But maybe you want to tap into that a little bit more. And I've talked about this before. The gap from 18 to 50 is one that's going to be painful to watch for me because there's so many players in that range that I really, really like and think could fit the Seahawks. And you know who else probably feels that way? John Schneider. He doesn't want to sit there and just watch the parade go by from 18 to 50 and all those good players that they've done so much work on. But the problem is in trying to find a trade partner, which also makes sense because, you know, at 18, theoretically this year, you might not get a player that matches with what the value usually is at 18. But finding someone to move up and meet you there or meet you halfway, the desire to give up capital in a really strong day 2 centric draft like this, it's going to take a very particular team in a very unique situation. And we may have found one. And I think it takes 2 factors really in order to create a trade partner: desperation and the need for a quarterback. The Cleveland Browns fit into this bucket as well. They're just kind of hamstrung by certain things, and they don't have the draft capital that the Giants have. It's harder to find a true match. And the reason I'm going to talk about the Giants today is because there is new reporting in the last 24 hours, more definitive reporting. This isn't just me spitballing, although I love to spitball. You do know that about me, right? But Diana Rossini reporting today, and this has been corroborated, backed up by CBS's Jonathan Jones, that the Giants have a clear plan to address the quarterback position, and that plan does not include using the 3rd pick on a quarterback. They don't see the value in going Shadeur Sanders at 3 or Jaxson Dart at 3 in lieu of Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. Why would they? I mean, this makes all the sense in the world. You talk about desperate. You're going to pass up on one of those guys for a quarterback who needs some development and has some concerns in their game and isn't a sure thing. And then on the tail of that, there's a report from Jordan Schultz that Brian Daboll is a big fan of Jaxson Dart. Now, there's some reporting that they do like Sanders, and they very well could just sit there and let the draft come to him, and maybe one of those guys gets to 34. Like in a perfect world, that's what they would do. The problem is the Pittsburgh Steelers are sitting there at 21, and they desperately need a quarterback. All they have on the roster at this point is Mason Rudolph, right? But they've been there, done that. Rudolph is a solid player that you can win some games with, but they need to get that position fixed moving forward. We still don't know if Aaron Rodgers is going to end up there or not. The owner has given indication that he thinks that could happen, but then if you saw any of the Rodgers interview with McAfee the other day, it doesn't sound certain. And so if you're going to move up into the first round, and there's a guy that you want, and you're afraid the Steelers are going to take him, man, you got to get ahead of him. You have to. And that's a much, much more severe jump. And we haven't seen that in a long time. In fact, we haven't seen a team move up into the first round since 2018, when the Ravens moved up from 52 to 32 with the Eagles to get Lamar Jackson. And then you tie in that 5th-year option as well. So what I thought I would do today is go to the trade chart. Try to put a proposal together that makes sense. Not just making it up, right? Not just throwing gum at the wall and seeing if it sticks, but trying to use actual value from the trade charts. And then we're going to look back at that Lamar Jackson trade and see if we can use that a little bit as a guide. Try to make this as realistic as possible. And then we can all ask ourselves if it makes sense for the Seahawks and if it's something that we like. So first of all, the trade charts these were developed decades ago. And the first one to really put it in writing is Jimmy Johnson. And that trade chart is referred to as the Jimmy Johnson trade chart. And as recently as a couple of years ago, there was a report that as many as 10 teams in the league, about a third of the league, right, still uses that chart. I prefer a chart named after Rich Hill. And what they did is they actually take 10 years of actual trade data and incorporate that into their grading system. I think it's a little bit more realistic. Some teams use that. Some teams now, with just about every team having an analytical department. Well, they all have an analytical department. It's just how big it is. Some, I think the Cleveland Browns employ 12 people in their analytics department. Some teams have as few as 4, but every team leans into the analytics these days. And so some of them, presumably, I would imagine, have come up with their own system. But I like to use Rich Hill as a guide. It's not perfect, right? Teams don't, there's some wiggle room there. It all depends on supply and demand, right? One person may be willing to pay more for that car than you are, and you're not going to get that car as a result, even though you stuck to your guns and you feel like that's what that car's worth. I'm not going to pay a penny more. Every team has a different philosophy, right? Every team has a different motivation. Every team is in a different spot on the arc of contention. And when you talk about the Giants, you're talking about a team with a head coach and general manager who are squarely on the hot seat. They need to have a good offseason. They need to build a roster next year that has the look of a team that can keep getting better. They have to save their jobs. And the biggest thing they can do, the biggest thing they've whiffed on, is quarterback, right? And so when you start connecting these dots, putting these reports together, I think the Steelers are a real factor here. And so the Seahawks could be sitting in a good position. Now, is that too far to move back? We'll talk about that in just a minute. But here's what I came up with. And the Giants are uniquely poised to make a move like this because they have high picks, obviously because of where they finished. They have high picks in every round, or at least the second, third, and fourth. Those are more attractive. And they have multiple picks in the third round. They have 2 third rounders. They have 65 and 99. And so something like this makes sense per the trade chart. And at first I played around with just trying to find equal value from this year's draft, but it would essentially require the Giants to give up both of their thirds and then maybe even throw something else into. Maybe they're willing to do that, right? We could talk about whether 65, 99, and 105 would be enough for you to move up. It doesn't really make sense for them. And I also don't know if it's attractive enough for the Seahawks to make a move that significant. But if you start talking about a first rounder in 2026, a draft that is generally considered to be better overall, but in particular at the quarterback position, where even if Sam Darnold goes out and has a solid season in 2025 and looks like a guy that you can move forward with and win with, if you have a shot at a clear franchise quarterback who's coming out at the age of 22, a Garrett Nussmeier, a Drew Aller, I am of the opinion, I don't think Arch Manning comes out next year, but maybe he does if a certain team is sitting there at the top of the draft that he feels good about going to. Then maybe you start to get excited about the possibility of adding to that. Or even if Darnold goes out and he establishes himself as a franchise quarterback, well then okay, then we can get that elite pass rusher. We can go get the best offensive tackle in the draft and play him at right tackle for Abe Lucas. There's a million different scenarios potential there. But this is fair value based on the trade charts. You would get number 34, the second pick in the second round. You would get 65, the second pick in the third round, and then that 2026 first rounder. Now, there's other little tweaks you can make to this, right? If that's a little too rich, then the Giants do have other things that they could offer. They could give you that other third, or they could give you 105. I've played with this scenario, and this matches pretty well too. And if you think that that's a little unreasonable, how about 64, 105, and next year's second? I don't know if that's enticing enough to move back. Now, let's take a look at a trade comp, the closest thing we can find to a trade comp. This is what the deal looked like in 2018. The Ravens move up from 52 to 32. They give up their fourth that year and then their second rounder the next year. And so that's why I say, kind of, you could also make the argument that, giving up 105 and a second next year makes some sense as well, especially considering that you're talking about the 34th pick here instead of the 52nd pick. And then I just added down there for context, they ended up turning that second rounder into cornerback Avonte Maddox, who's still with the team, has played 81 games with them since then. And then Miles Sanders, who they got in the fourth round at 125 there, coming out of that trade, gave him a couple good years before moving on. So decent value there for the Eagles. And, they've won 2 Super Bowls in the last 10 years, so they're doing okay, right? So that begs the question of, well, 2 questions. Is it worth it? And would you do it? And so what I did is went to the consensus draft board to give you an idea of what that group might look like between 18, 34, and then 50, where the Seahawks currently sit now, right? And give you some insight into what the motivation might be for Schneider to do this. And I pulled a little quote from his radio show a couple of weeks ago. He said, every year in regards to trading, every year is totally different. Having those 5 picks in the first 92, it allows you to maneuver a little bit depending on how other people see it. Initially, you're like, yeah, we're going to take 5 really good players. But then you get into a situation where it's like, all right, that guy's a starter. We should probably move to go get him. Now, in this case, I think he was talking more about moving up on day 2. Moving up is something he hasn't done that much in his career. He's only done it 11 times. That's 16th among active general managers. So, or all general managers, some of them haven't made trades yet. So middle of the pack, but it would be lower if there were some more tenured GMs in the league. Whereas he's moved down 22 times. That's 9th among GMs in the league. And so even if they sit where they are, I think we're going to be talking about he's going to be wanting to move from 50 up in the second round because there's that big group of players that they like, and they've talked to and met with a bunch of these guys. So I pulled the consensus draft board. Here are the names between 32 and, say, 41 that might be enticing enough for them to move up for. Donovan Ezeraku, edge rusher, Boston College. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver, Ohio State. Josh Connerly, the tackle from Oregon. Maxwell Hairston, the really fast cornerback from Kentucky. Siobhan Revell, the cornerback from East Carolina. The Seahawks have met with him. Donovan Jackson, the outstanding guard from Ohio State that can also play tackle. Seahawks met with him at the Combine. Trey Amos, cornerback from Ole Miss. Nick Scorton, big defensive end from Texas A&M, and then Jalen Milroe, who we know the Seahawks have had in for a 30 visit at the VMAC. So that's a group of players that I think, even if the Seahawks stick and pick at 18, they're going to be looking to use some of those extra assets and move up and select one of those players. Like, I think it's really, we've talked about the idea of not going offensive line in the first round because the value's better on day 2, and some of the drop off in some of the other positions are more significant. And so maybe you stay at 18 and you get that edge rusher, you get that defensive tackle, Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon. Those make a lot of sense. And then you look at this group and you go, Donovan Jackson. Man, I'd be thrilled if they moved up to get Donovan Jackson. But you'd have to give up 90 or 92, very likely, or your 4th round pick. What if you had even more assets on day 2 and you could move up aggressively like this and still not miss out on some of the other players in this group? So when you pull the list kind of beyond that, at 60, Jonas Savaiinaea, who played right tackle at Arizona but projects as a guard. Alfred Collins, the big run-stuffing nose tackle from Texas. That would certainly fill a need. Trey Harris, dynamic wide receiver. Ole Miss, Jack Besh, MVP of the Senior Bowl, receiver from TCU, who would be such a great fit in this offense, as would Alec Manor, who's an outside receiver, best blocker in the draft. Femi Oladejo, who I've talked about as one of my guys I don't want to leave this draft with. He drips Seahawk traits, not just as a really rocked up edge rusher, but also as an A-plus character and human being. Harold Fannin Jr., the uber productive tight end from Bowling Green, caught over 100 passes for 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns last year, and can play fullback. Marcus Bowe from Purdue, who projects as kind of a poster child, ideal outside zone guard or even center. And then Kevin Winston Jr., the safety out of Penn State, who's coming off an ACL injury. Otherwise, he might be talked about as a first-round pick. I think he'd be a great fit in this Mike Macdonald defense. So you start to look at those lists, and now you can see why, like, I want more bites at the apple there, right? And so given that, would you do this? I mean, it would kind of suck on day one, wouldn't it? Especially we're doing a live draft party. We're going 4 hours deep. We're all talking. I got special guests coming in, and they trade all the way out of the first round. I mean, it would certainly give us a lot to talk about, and it would make day two even more dynamic. Goodness. But you would get so many opportunities to get into those other groups from the consensus big board of players that you've done the work on, you've studied, you've had in the building, you've met with. They fit needs. And in position groups, especially when you start talking about receiver and corner, where after day two, man, the drop off there is pretty significant. Or for those of you who think that they just need to throw a ton more assets at the offensive line, even just ignoring the fact that they have a bunch of young players they've drafted recently on the line that are probably going to be part of the solution. Okay, then in your brain you can visualize taking more of those guys. It gives you a chance to maybe kind of reach a little bit, maybe take a Chase Lunt on day two, if you're afraid you're not going to get a shot at him with your late 4 on day 3 because someone else is going to take him. I think that's a good example of a player where he's probably not going to start for you as a rookie. You're taking him kind of as the heir apparent to Abe Lucas if you move on from him at right tackle. So you're looking at redshirting him most likely. But if you're afraid that you're going to miss out on him by waiting and being patient, waiting till the 4th round, okay, now we have all these picks on day 2. We can use one of those. 34, 65, and a first rounder next year. So that would give you, I mean, we're talking about on day 2, you'd have 34, 50, 52, 65, 82, and 92, right? You have 6 picks on day 2. You would dominate that day. And you get a second first rounder next year. You would be the first team, and I think, because teams are going to be unwilling to give up that pick unless they're as desperate as the Giants. Maybe the Browns are in that category as well. You could position yourself to be the only team that's holding 2 first-round picks next year. Am I crazy? I mean, I've tried to put together as rational and as reasonable argument as I can for why it might make sense. Certainly makes sense for the Giants. Absolutely. Does it make sense for the Seahawks? I'm torn, but I think I'm only torn because of what I do here and because I just want a player on the roster, a new player that we can talk about that night, that we can go to bed knowing is a Seahawk, and then we can wake up and talk about the 4 picks on day 2. But if I'm trying to be as practical and pragmatic as possible, again, knowing that the level of player you can get at 34 is the same as what you could get at 18, unless someone like a Tyler Warren drops, right? We've talked about like guys we would stick and pick for, run to the podium for. I think it does make a lot of sense. Like that group that I gave you, like Emeka Egbuka and Donovan Ezeraku in particular, are guys that have been mocked to the Seahawks at 18. If you can get that same player at 34 and another player in the 60s and a first rounder next year, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Tell me what you think in the comments. Would you do it? Would you not do it? I can't wait to find out. Coming up, if you're a member of the channel, we'll have a members-only live chat on Sunday. Talk about anything you want to talk about when it comes to the NFL draft. And then I will unveil my final predictive mock draft on Monday. This is the one where I try to predict what I think they will do as opposed to what I want them to do or just working through different scenarios. So there's that. Wednesday night, the night before the draft, we're doing a live watch party. We're going to watch the movie Draft Day together and have some fun doing that. And then live watch parties all throughout the first 2 days of the draft with special guests included. Be sure and join for that. Are we going to have a first-round pick to talk about? We will see. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, also Blue Sky on the same tagline. Subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button. Let me know what you think in the comments, and then join me again on Monday for my final mock draft. If you want to sign up for a membership, you can do that as well, and we'll see you on Sunday for the live chat. Until then, forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.